Hi, Abe.
Good morning, Mario. How are you?
Good.
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 Everything okay?
Thank God. And
Good.
you?
No complaints.
That's good.
No complaints.
Abe, where do you live? In the valley?
I live on Pico Robertson area,
Okay.
South Camden, South Camden. So we were honored with Ernie this Shabbos with the
Yes,
choir.
I know.
They were very good, very good.
Yeah. Oh, he spoke?
Oh, he's
Or
singing.
sang? No, he sang.
Hey. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like a,
You want to sit here?
no, there's like a reflection off the mirror, yeah.
Did you enjoy yourself on Shabbos?
Yes, it was very nice.
It was gorgeous. It was
Hi,
Hi,
very-
everyone. Hi, Ernie.
Hi.
You know Norm?
Hi, Ernie.
Hi, Norm. Welcome to our shiur. We'd love to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Susie.
Hi.
We are on page 138 in volume 8, or Chaim, Hilchos Tzitzis. We are, I guess some more people are signing on. Let's give some people a chance.
No.
Okay. We are dealing with the type of begadim, the type of garments that require tzitzis. So a beged is considered a four-cornered garment only if the garment is sufficiently open for the corners to be truly separated from one another. The shape of a regular talis katan or a talis gadol is a rectangle or a square, and therefore the corners are completely separated from one another. By contrast, in the case of, for example, a tzitzis shirt or undershirt, think about like somebody has an undershirt, but there's like a split on either side where they try to make it, four-cornered, but the garment is closed there, so it does not open fully to the shape of a rectangle or square. So what's the din regarding such a partially closed garment? The Shulchan Aruch states that the garment is subject to tzitzis as long as it's mostly open. But if it's mostly closed, it is exempt. Malbushim, says the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Yud, Shem Psuchim min Atzodim Lamata, that are open. For example, think about our tzitzis, which is completely open on the side. Yesh lehem dal kanfos atzad matu, l'malaim stumim. Im rovososum potter. Now, if the majority of that side is closed, potter. V'imruva pasuach chayiv. But if the majority is open, then of course they're chayiv. If it's half and half, chetziv pasuach matil noso l'chono v'chayiv b'tzitzis. Then yotzim bo b'Shabbos, but you shouldn't go out on Shabbos with it because you would be carrying the strings. It wouldn't be a good garment unless you had an eruv. So how do the poskim discuss how to measure the majority of a garment in the event that the garment has sleeves? Should the sleeves be considered open or closed? The Mishnah Berurah reaches the conclusion that the sleeve is considered closed. According to this, a sleeve garment may be subject to tzitzis only if most of the area of the lower portion of the garment is open up to the shoulder. Think about our tzitzis, which are completely open all the way up to the shoulder. So then that's why they're chayiv tzitzis. But our shirts, which are closed all the way down, even though on the bottom of your shirt there might be a little slit, which where we created a corner, it would not require tzitzis because of this din. Ruvo pasuach chayiv, hainu dafka rov mikol habeged. Talis cotton. But for example, the tailor who makes a real talis cotton should like when a tailor, they sew up the whole sides and they only have a space for you to put your arms in. The toifin lamata maneka u'menichim rov pasuach u'morim rak mitachas hayadayim v'zeh tos gomer ki az lo nikra bazdad kanvas. This, the Mishnah Berurah says, is not considered that it's got four corners. V'karva dover shamavarach mavarach levatol, and therefore putting tzitzis on such a garment would be a bracha levatol if you made a bracha on it. Elatzarich limdod af mashal amalam and ayadayim v'anekev choshev gam ken ki ilu osos. It's all considered if it's closed. So a sleeve garment is not going to be possible to use it for tzitzis. Now, what is the halacha when the open portion is also closed, but in a superficial way? It's not sewn, but it's like you close it with clips or buttons. So Shulchan Aruch says a kappa, which in Ladino was an overcoat, shehi psucha binyan sheish ladad kanfos, imikavu bo ashtraniga, if they put some kind of like clips, la soiso kastuma kedei lapotrim mitzitzis, ein amoil tikun zeim lo tia kvua mechatzi or kolamat l'kolapochos. It would be considered open, and it wouldn't pater it from tzitzis, as if, for example, if you sewed it completely. Based upon this case of Shulchan Aruch, what kind of fasting or class would designate a garment as closed, which would then therefore pater it from tzitzis? Ein lasois betal koson krosim lemata michetzio. You shouldn't put hooks in a talis cotton from the midpoint down, because then it's like it's closed. Davi kasosum. Lushin ichvachu mo'od roshe krosim l'chad hasheni. Sheinu yachol latir on aliyah de ma'isa. You can't open it up unless you actually physically do something. If you had to do something physical to open it up, it's considered enough of a chibur to close it, and then it would be pater from tzitzis. Otherwise, it would not be considered closed; it would be considered open. It would be chayiv tzitzis. Thus, according to Mishnah Berurah, a rather rigid closer renders the garment closed, and if this is implemented beneath the midway portion of the garment, it's pater from tzitzis. On the other hand, if the closure is easily open, the garment is not considered closed, and it's not exempt from tzitzis. A similar position is adopted by the Piskei Tshuva in the case of someone who wants to tighten the talis cotton around the body through the use of buttons or loops. Look at the page. Look at the next page, where they use snaps. It's tzitzis, and on the side there's snaps to close it up. Ein meniyim alasos chibur echad bekaftor v'lulos v'chadoima tachas atzila yodav under his armpits, or lamata somach l'kanfos talis cotton, or near the corners. Im yesh lo tzorach bekach kedei lahadikach chizos al gufo. For example, he wants to keep it closed. Shelo yikar v'lo yislach lev chadoma. Doesn't want it to open up and get dirty. Therefore, if the tzitzis are mostly open on the sides, but contain one snap on each side, such tzitzis would be kosher since the snaps are easily opened and closed, and the garment clearly still appears to have four corners. But the Yalkut Yosef is skeptical about whether the garment is still subject to tzitzis when one clasps it closed with snaps of the like. So if you have such a tzitzis, it's a shaila whether you should make a bracha on it, right? Talit cotton shesorgin l'toyadei lachzanim b'tzadav snaps ad shenira shein lo abrakanfa. So it's not open like our tzitzis. You've closed the sides. Yesh li stapik b'zem mekayim bos hasham. Shari rova beged nizgal yadei ahidut l'achzanim. Most of the garment's been closed. Aval achash shepozach l'atzanim. If you open up, then you have a kosher pair of tzitzis. Okay. Page 141.
Velcro would be.
And Velcro would be the same. I mean, unless it's very easily open with, if you need a misa to do it, it would fulfill that obligation. Now, last week, we were asked a lot of questions about towels, blankets, other four-cornered garments. Are they mechuyev tzitzis or not? So which four-cornered garments are exempt from tzitzis? In addition to the exemptions discussed previously, Some regular four-cornered garments may also be exempt from tzitzis. The poskim discuss four types of garments. A garment meant as a head covering, like a scarf. A garment that serves neither for warmth nor for protecting the body. That could be like a towel. A garment which is used not for clothing, but which merely is placed upon the person, known as a hala'a. That's like a shawl. A garment whose corners are not evenly distributed with two in the front and two behind, but rather has all four on one side. So regarding a covering for the head or neck, the discussion stems from a comment in the Sifri. In Dvarim, it says, Asher techase ba, gdilim tase la asher techase ba, prat lemafores, shelo techase rosh berubo. It doesn't cover your head and the majority of the body, so therefore the mafores would be potter. Now, what is the mafores? So the Beis Yosef, who is who's the major commentary on the tour, brings v'zeh loshna itur b'sifri ba prat lemafores suder. It's a shawl shein miskasa barosh of Reuben that doesn't cover his head and the majority of his body. Ad kad lashon. U'midivrei Rabbeinu Agadol, the Mahari Abu Bov, v'divrei Kaftar v'afera nira, the mefarshe mafores suder arosh. They learn that mafores means only a headscarf. Vafilu miskasa barosh of Rubo nami potter. Thus, even if it covers his head and the majority of his body, it would be potter. So, according to the first explanation of the Itter, the Sifri is excluding a garment from tzitzis that does not cover the head and the majority of the body. But if it covered the head and the majority of the body, it would be chayiv. As a beged, it's subject to tzitzis only when it covers a person's head and the majority of the body. However, according to the second explanation of the Maria Bov, the Sifrei excludes a garment designed to cover only the head, even if it also covers additional parts of the body. That means, if the intent of this garment is to cover the head, it happens to cover the rest of the body, according to the way the Maria Bov learns, it would be potter. The Beis Yosef also discusses the laws of shawls meant only for covering the neck. Like when we go out in winter, like a neck scarf. Are these comparable to items meant for covering the head, which are exempt, even if they also cover parts of the body? Or is their status comparable to items which cover parts of the body, and they would be subject to tzitzis? The Beis Yosef concludes that in principle, a shawl is subject to tzitzis and is considered covering of the body and not of the head. It seems from the language of the Beis Yosef that this may be true according to the opinion of Maria Bov and the Kaftar Chofer as well. However, the Itur, who exempts the head covering from tzitzis because it does not cover the majority of the body, may exempt this type of shawl in principle as well. Indeed, the custom in Eretz Yisrael was to affix tzitzis to such shawls. However, in Egypt, this was not the custom. And the Beis Yosef offers three explanations for why the Egyptians didn't put tzitzis on their shawls. One, after the time of the Pater L'Hubnei Eretz Mitzrayim Hainu Mishum Delo Mikri Ksus, because they're not really called a covering, which is what the Torah uses the word. Ela davar shu derech levisha u'ituf. Aval, it's not a ksus, is a something that you wear. Aval hani sudorim she'enim ela derech halah. They just overlie something, then that would be not considered a ksus. Lo. Shrei kosav ha-mordechai in hilchos tzitzis v'zel hashono nirali she'ein chayavim b'tzitzis klal ela osam she'ein derech levisha. Tzitzis has got to be the manner you wear it. Masher techasebo mashmanami derech levisha. Va'afilu derech halosh achai bekloim. Now, when the din of shatness, that you can't put wool and linen together, that applies to even something that you just put on, you just even cover, like a shawl would be chayv and klaim adas noy to lift or by tzitzis. Lo iskis ela levisha. Halaw might be enough for kloim, but it's not enough to make you chayv tzitzis. Number two, another reason that the Beis Yosef learns why the Bnei Eretz Mitzrayim did not put tzitzis on their shawls. Why do you wear these shawls? It's for your head and to keep it warm. Or shade if it's sunny. Therefore, it's not a ksus for your body. It's a ksus, it's a covering for your head. Covering for your head does not require tzitzis. So he says, shawls are used for the following things. Number one, litzror bahem mos. It's not just a shawl. You remember, think about the pictures of the Rambam who would wear like a turban, right? He would take the shawl and wrap it and make it almost look like a head covering. And they would carry jewels or money or something of safekeeping in that item. Litzror b'hem mos. Lavi b'hem peiros, put fruit there. L'kanech hazeh, or to use it to wipe your sweat. Lachkor b'hem k'she'osim shum avodat masa. Or they would even take it off their head, put it around their belt when they did heavy lifting. L'kanech b'hem hasadem, or to wash it or clean your hands. Even though l'chora you're benefiting from the heat, from protection from heat from cold, it's not really the main function is to protect you from heat or cold. It doesn't fit the geder, the requirement of techasebah to require tzitzis. People who sold garments, and let's say it was shotness, so you're not allowed to wear shotness, but they were allowed to, let's say, carry a bunch of textiles on their back. Even though they might have benefited a little bit in the sun or the rain. So since the main function is not for anos kisui, that to get the pleasure of the covering, even though you are being nene, afal pisha nene, lo karinen be'lo tilbash, achanami lo karinen be'asher techasipah. So the three reasons of Beis Yosef to accept the Egyptian shawls from tzitzis is one, only a garment worn for clothing and wrapping is subject to tzitzis, but not a garment whose use is merely overlaying. Number two, since these are primarily meant for covering the head and not the neck, they are potter from tzitzis. And when the garment is not meant for warmth and protection, but rather for other functions, it's exempt. So ultimately, the author of the Beis Yosef, who we know is the Rav Yosef Karo, codified this exemption of the shawl when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Mitznefes, a turban, is ptura. Afilu shel artzas amarav shebez roshem ushlachem al ketfeim v'gufam. Even in North Africa, where the two ends were put over their shoulders and bodies, but since the primary function is for head covering, the primary function is to cover the head. So it's very clear. People put a shawl around their neck. Shenikra ba'aravi, shade or shid. V'chein buka. Shayunoisim bisfarad al-kisfeim. Also pturim. So a neck shawl, a head covering, even though they have four corners, so far we're learning that they're potter from tzitzis.
Like a Mexican poncho, that would be a problem.
The Mexican poncho would be a problem because l'chor that covers your body.
Yeah.
However, we'll see it may not be open enough. Remember, we learned today that the sides have to be open to make it look like it's really got four corners. Think about our tzitzis, the talis cotton that we wear, it's completely open. So if you have a poncho where there's just a hole in it for your head, and you put the poncho and it's like you're wearing a sheet, that wouldn't classify. You understand? Because it wouldn't be open enough on the side. That's the first halacha we learned tonight is that Indian, it's got to be open So you really see mamish the four corners. But that's a different
So,
exemption.
what is there a maximum? Is there a maximum width? And we were to lace him. Let's say it's an amma wide. So what happens if you wear a poncho and it's square, but it's 3 ammas wide. So it hangs down your
Oh, I
shoulder.
understand. You mean you don't. I was thinking when Sai said a poncho, there's a hole in the middle and you put it on as a, would put your head on and the thing is behind you. But the way you're saying, it could be like a talus, which if it covers your body, it would be chayv and tzitzis, absolutely. But you see the difference, the way we learned earlier today about these begodim that are closed on the sides. So you don't see the arba kanfos enough, and that there's a p'tur there. So that's why now, if the poncho has been opened up on the sides, so then in a chanami it would require tzitzis. So let's go further. Rav Yosef Kar does not specify in the Shulchan Aruch which of the three reasons serves as the primary basis for the exemption. The Bir Halacha, remember the Bir Halacha was written by the Chofetz Chaim as a sort of a super commentary on his Mishnah Brura, right? The Chofetz Chaim writes the Mishnah Brura, it's a commentary on Orach Chaim, but then when he wants to go into detail, more lomdus, he will write the Bir Halacha. So the Bir Halacha mentions this only the second and the third reason. The fact that covering the head and not the neck, and when it's not meant for warmth and protection, when it's got other functions. And accepts the third reason as the foremost argument. If a cloth functions not for the purpose of providing warmth and protection, but for another purpose, it's excluded from the words of with which you cover yourself. Says the Bir Halacha. So these shawls are lachgor bayam kishoisim shum avaris masa. They use it as a belt if they're going to do heavy lifting. Even though they might have some benefit in the sun, but still lo karina nasher techasabo. We don't consider it techasabo. He says that the Magen Avraham, who was a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch and the Gra, the Bir HaGra, had mentioned that last reason. So that's why the Mishnah Brura is focused on the third reason, because the Magen Avraham and the Gra focused on it. The Chofetz Chaim lived in Radin, in Poland. People now put a large strip of cloth, 1 amma, right, 24 by 24 inches over the shoulder. It doesn't have these other things like a belt or whatever. So therefore, he says it would be chayv and tzitzis. But the other reasons the Beis Yosef gave the after the dafka derech levisha v'lo Allah, that you got to wear it. You can't just put it on top of you. Perhaps it's like think about a cape. That's what he's talking, like a cape. When you go to the opera and it's l'derech kavod, it's not really for warmth or for heat. So therefore what he says, because we'll see, if there's ever a question whether or not it's chayv and tzitzis, what they do is they'll make one of the corners round. Therefore you don't have a 4-corner garment and you don't have an issue at all. So whenever there's a suffix, just make sure you make one of the corners round, and then you're not going to have a problem. Page 146. Towels, aprons, other items of clothing. Based upon the third reason that we learned, the Piskei Tshuva writes that the status of textiles, whose function is something other than the benefit of clothing one's body, are potter from tzitzis. Mikal nilmad later kama v'kama suge begodim ha'onim l'mataras hanal. Kagon magavot, he says towels, sinrim, aprons, chagorot, belts. The barbers, they put a garment on you when you get a haircut. Rala asuy l'tzorach masvel l'tznius. Like a veil that's made for tznius. V'chlal zeh tachpoiser shel Purim. A Purim costume. Begodim v'kisum shorim asum lagin make karina, radiation, garments that are lead lined that you use to protect against radiation. Shakpitz vapude mogin asum lagin mimakos cherev. Vest, a bulletproof vest. The kadure oyer, the kol kayotze is a kivan. She'enim ondim vasurim bikorm l'tzorach hanol levisha. These items, none of these, are primarily made to protect you from the sun or from the cold or from the rain. Ein chal aleim klal chiyuv tzitzis. There's no chiyuv tzitzis. Hagam shu atayt atayt b'hem banat levishim nechamo hakor. Even though right now you might be getting some benefit from them, from cold or from sun. Ve'ein mokum lachmer le'egel knaf. And you don't have to trouble yourself to round a corner because you're concerned that, maybe you're wearing a garment that's requiring tzitzis. It's not, these are completely putter from tzitzis.
So the same poncho that I bought in Mexico, if I say I'm buying it only for Purim as a costume.
Well, that because it's not being used on a regular basis for levisha. Right? So he says a Purim costume is not, even though it, it's not really a garment that you're going to wear for protection. So they wouldn't require tzitzis. What about blankets? Blankets certainly have four corners. Like Chaim said, it's like a talus. People do sometimes sit, and read a book.
But it's not meant for that purpose.
Hang on, they sit in the winter time. Let's say it's a cold room. You'll bring a blanket and you'll put it around you while you read, right? So we saw above that the Bir Halacha accepts the third consideration as the primary one in exempting certain types of garments from tzitzis. However, where that does not apply, and the only basis for exemption is the fact that one does not wear the item, but merely uses it as an overlay, it would seem that it should be subject to the obligation of tzitzis unless one rounds one of the corners. Meaning, it seems that the poskim only accepted the third reason of the Beis Yosef, that everyone seems to agree, the Magen Avraham, the Gra, okay? But the first reason was not so halah, putting something just on top of you, not necessarily, is a reason necessarily to put tzitzis on it. Accordingly, one might argue that blankets and sheets should be subject to tzitzis. With respect to the way in which they are worn, the fact that one places it over his body when one sleeps may constitute overlaying, but it's placed there for warmth. It does not cover the majority of the person's body. Nevertheless, it may be justified to exempt them for a different reason, namely, their status as ksus laila, a night covering, which is not subject to the mitzvah of tzitzis. The Shulchan Aruch rules that sheets need not have tzitzis affixed to them, even when one sleeps with them in the morning. Sadinim, aval pishorim yoshan ben baboiker, ein matilim ben tzitzis. The Mishnah Berurah explains that even according to the Rambam, who holds that ksus laila applies only when using the item at night. Remember, we debated that. Is a ksus laila exempt no matter when you wear it? So the Rambam held it's only exempt at night. But even according to the Rambam, says the Mishnah, where there are grounds to allow using a sheet or blanket to sleep during the day, as we can combine this consideration, since you're not wearing it at night, with the exemption of overlaying to be lenient, right? We have the tour of halah. It's not levisha, it's just covering. However, the Mishnah Berurah notes that the Magen Avraham suggests being stringent in the case of a wool blanket that is used during the day. In that case, it is appropriate to round one corner. So I know my wife has a warm woolen blanket downstairs in the den, folded up, ready for someone who might want to read a book and cover himself with a warm blanket. According to the way we're learning now, one of those corners should be rounded. Otherwise, it might be chayv and tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah. "Mipnei she'ikar tashmishin b'layla," since a sheet or a blanket, its main use is at night, uksus laila mikri, ach lefi zeh lo haya ptur ela rak larosh. The Rosh said, once it's got the shame of a ksus laila, it's potter no matter when you wear it. Means even if you wear a ksus laila in the daytime, it would be potter. Aval Rambam, the ksus laila chayiv b'yom chayiv. So the Mishnah Berurah points out to us that the way the Rambam learned, that even though something is called a nighttime garment, if you wear it in the daytime, you'll be chayiv and tzitzis. So now we're stuck with the same problems. According to the Rosh, it's not a problem. But according to the Rambam, it's a problem. For example, covering yourself with a blanket during the daytime. But however, the Mishnah Berurah says, other people say there's another reason to be lenient. Either you have to wear it like clothing, or derech ituf. Ituf, we're going to see, means to cover your head. Lo derech ha'aloha ba'alma, but just putting it on top of you like a cape, or like a poncho, like Sai said, is derech ha'aloha. It's not derech levisha. V'yesh cholkin, but there's arguers, v'svir le'dafilu miyatzia tachtav beged shadal kanfus chay b'tzitzis, that even if you put yourself under a four-cornered beged, like a poncho, it's subject to tzitzis. Certainly, v'chol shekein derech ha'aloha. Al kein ichriya magon avrom, v'yasa kirnachas agula. So therefore, the Magen Avram in those cases said, make one of the corners round. Then you won't have a problem according to all the shitas. You should be machmir if the sheet is wool. But not if it's made out of linen or other materials. I'm going to read a footnote. According to the Prima Godim, the reason for being stringent specifically with woolen blankets is that all opinions agree that woolen garments are subject to the obligation of tzitzis on the Torah level. We went through this at length, right? The Mechaber says that you should wear your tzitzis, they should always be of wool, because that way you're always going to be chayv. The Ramah held that our tzitzis could be made of cotton because it's also midoraisa. But l'chol hadayis, if it's wool, the obligation is on a Torah level. All agree that linen garments are also subject to tzitzis on a Torah level. Many opinions hold that one should not affix tzitzis to a linen garment due to concerns of shatnez with wool strings. We're going to see later on in Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to see later on some halacha psuka regarding that.
Any requirement as to how obvious that corner has to be, or it's going to be totally hidden, like on the back of the garment, or the blanket, or whatever it is that you're wearing?
If it is like, well, how are you not going to see a corner?
Let's say it's the size of a quarter, just a small corner. How big does it have to be, or does it not have to be so obvious?
No, it has to
You
be.
got two in the front and you got two in the back, so you can put it on one of the back corners and nobody really sees it.
No, remember we learned earlier on today that the corners have to be obvious. That's why there has to be a slit down the side. It can't be that, right? Why did we learn today that the begodim have to have slits? Because you got to be able to recognize that they have corners.
Yeah,
A blanket you can obviously see four corners to a blanket.
but if you make a corner the diameter of a quarter, let's say, you really can't see it unless you're really.
When you say quarter, you mean round, you round it?
Rounded.
If it's rounded, it's not a corner. It's got to be rectangular. It's got to be a not.
No, but I'm saying, is there any requirement as to how round it has to be? You can make it very small.
That's fine, as long as it's not it's not as long as a corner,
Not a point.
it's rounded. Right, we said. Despite the Mishnah Berurah's stringency regarding woolen bedding, the Piskei Teshuvos note that the common custom is not to round any corners. I mean, we all have sheets and blankets and they don't have tzitzis on them, and we're not rounding them, the Piskei Tshuva says. He cites the Pri Chazon Ish and others that one may be lenient even in the case of a wool blanket. He says go look at what the nation does. We see people don't necessarily round off their blankets, even if they're wool. For Kosav Chazon Ish, those that are lenient have someone to rely on. Oh, they're medagdikim, we're very careful. Particularly if those people use that blanket to cover themselves in the daytime. And then they'll put tzitzis even on blankets of other materials. But a bed sheet that people put on a bed, people lie on top of a sheet. They don't cover themselves with the sheet. Even the medagdikim don't. We're not talking about a sheet that you actually get under the sheets. We're talking about a sheet that covers the bed and you lie on top of that. That even the medagdikim will not round off a corner because no one is covering themselves with that. And there's no reason to be stringent regarding blanket covers to round their corners, since they are insignificant. Oh, the blanket covers, like a duvet, like you stick a blanket in one of those covers. They're bottled to the cover itself. They're not considered an independent garment that would require tzitzis. Usmichas puch, that's a duvet. You don't have to round them either. These are these very thick blankets. They're rounded because they're thick. If it's thick, meaning, see, if it's rounded this way, then it's already considered rounded. It's not, it's got to be a flat answer to your question. Right. What about scarves, suits, coats? The poskim present additional argument to exempt four-corner garments from tzitzis. A beged is subject to tzitzis only if it has two corners in its front and two in its back. But when all the corners are in front, it's exempt. Malbushim shel glilot bnei Ashkenaz u'Sfard. He says clothing from people in Germany and Spain. Their garments are made, so it's not two in front and two in the back that are exactly mechuvanim zekeneged zu, symmetrical. Pturim. So that's, you understand, our suits are also not made. First of all, a lot of our suits are rounded, right? The fronts are rounded. So that's not a corner. But even if it's not rounded, but they're not made where they're symmetrical front, back, front, back. On this basis, the Piskei Tshuva writes that modern scarves may be subject to tzitzis if they are large enough, depending on how they are worn. We're going to see Shiur 6 that's coming up, what that Shiur is going to be. Says the Piskei Tshuvas, Tzifim shalanu hachorfim, winter scarves, shebaim bikar lanat chimun, that's meant for warmth. Velola covered grade, it's not wearing it for like covered, like a beauty, like a woman who wears a beautiful scarf. That's not for warmth. That's for covered. It's for honor. It's for beauty. It's not necessarily for warmth. Now, on the other hand, we go skiing and we put on one of those woolen scarves. That's for warmth. So, now normally they don't have the shear that's going to make them chayv and tzitz. But if they're big, like if you fold it, the way to wear it is to fold it, and therefore keep all the four corners in front, and therefore you don't have to round the corners. In order for it to be chayiv tzitzit, it's going to have 2 in front and 2 in the back. So if you keep all 4 in the front, it's a patur for the beged. But if he wears this where some of it's covering his front, some of it's covering his back, such a scarf you should round one of the edges because you're going to have corners in front and corners in the back, which would require tzitzis. The Yalkut Yosef also adopts the view that by letter of the law, a scarf is entirely exempt from tzitzis, though a God-fearing person should round one of the corners if it's large enough to qualify for the size of a tzitzis garment. A winter scarf, for the reasons we've already discussed. Somebody who's very machmir can round one of the corners. If there's enough size in this scarf for sheer talis. The Mishnah Berurah discusses another application of the issue of the location of the corners. Shirts and coats that have 4 corners in front and another 2 corners behind. We cited a summary of the discussion from the Piskei Teshuvos as well as the Piskei Teshuvos' more lenient conclusion. I have a Mishnah Berurah. Hamedaber Mishnei Suge Begodim. The Mishnah Berurah talks about 2 types of garments that exist today. Chalifot, which are suits. V'choltzot, dress shirts. Ashiesh b'tzavar shalem kranos b'shnei tzaddim. The collars have corners. Yachad shnei akronos shebetachtias habeged milfanav nimtzeh dal kanfos. Think about it. You have a fancy overcoat. Sometimes the fancy overcoat will have corners, like 2 corners up on top. Like sometimes they'll even have buttons and you can close it. So that's 2 corners, and the 2 corners on the bottom are 4 corners in the front. Now you might have a split in the back, so you have 2 corners in the back. But you have 4 corners in the front, 2 corners in the back. And that's where he talks about Chalifos Arukos, a frock, like the Rosh Yeshiva wore. Outer coats, they're open in the back. Some of those garments will have 2 corners in the front, 2 corners in the back. He says a Yerei Shamayim should round one of those corners. We don't see that people have a minhag to do that. Aside from the leniencies we've been given by the Beis Yosef, there's another lenient factor, that the collar of the garment is folded over and rests upon the garment. And that's how you normally wear it. So you don't have to do it. Although as mentioned, the accepted practice in the former case is not to be stringent, the Ben Ish Chai also sees merit in approaching the matter with stringency. Hamabushim kegon glima v'chayotze, a cape, sheyesh lem beis kanfus lamala samach l'tzaver ubeis kanfus lamata pturim. Ikomakom Yerei Shamayim yizar lasas kirachas memagula, you should make 1 corner rounded. The azbezeh yipot l'kulalma. Afal pichul nagu alam l'chushal zeh hamachmir tov alav bracha. In the latter case, described the Piskei Teshuvah of the frocks and the trench coats with a slit that is mostly open. It may be proper to round 1 corner in order to exempt them from tzitzit. Nevertheless, some authorities hold it's unnecessary. See the footnote. See Piskei Teshuvah, based upon the Aruch HaShulchan and Tzitz Eliezer. The primary reason for leniency is that perhaps garments that must be fitted to a person put on by putting his hands through, like sleeves, are not included. Rather, only garments that are entirely open on all 4 sides and can be draped over a person are subject to tzitzit. So instead, the 4 corners are readily visible. So that answers your question, Saul, as well. Any questions, comments, ha'aros before we move on?
All these things, when you make the bracha then, so you would be making a bracha. If they're mechuyev, the suffix, would you make a bracha on that? Or be bracha vatala?
If that's, you would make a bracha if they were.
Make it.
If you didn't round it off, According to the opinion that it's chayiv tzitzis, then you would make a bracha when you put that garment on, as long as you hadn't put another, you may have put your talis cotton on already, and we'll see whether that exempts you from other begadim that you wear.
So Weber Scheinberg, they didn't pick a bracha every time you put them on, another one on, just the original one you put on.
We're going to see. We're going to get to the bracha, and we'll see whether you have to make a bracha every time or whether one potters everything. We're going to discuss in detail that which was asked last week about the al mitzvah tzitzis that you people. So we talked about. So some people hold that if you put on your tzitzis before you wash your hands, well, you can't make the bracha. So there, according to that sheet, you put the tzitzis on, then you wash your hands, then you could be mamashmesh in the strings and say al mitzvah tzitzis. But some people wait until shul, and when they do the atifa with the talis, it covers everything. We're going to discuss that. That's going to come in Shiur 6. The whole din of atifa, when you the two brachos of al mitzvah tzitzis versus al atifa tzitzis, litatef tzitzis. We'll see what that's all about and when and who and what. But right now, page 163.
Have we lost Ern? Yeah, he disappeared.
Where's Ernie? Disappeared.
I guess there's a first for everything. I just hope he knows that he's disappeared, that he's not giving a soliloquy.
I would assume if we can't see him, he can't see us.
I would hope so. Like the kid, when you cover your eyes, they think they
But
can't
it's
see.
been recorded. No, he turned off. He's not even on.
I'm just going to text him that he's disappeared, just in case he doesn't know.
Maybe he lost the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I did text him, he didn't answer,
Okay.
but I did it on the WhatsApp so you can text him.
Okay, very good. No problem. Ernie says he'll be on in just a minute.
Okay.
I think his battery went out.
they didn't find us the rescue.
Sorry, everybody. I just ran out of energy. Okay. 163. Who did we lose?
Just you.
Okay. In the previous two shiurim, we discussed halachas of tzitzis related to the garment itself. In this year, we will focus on some of the halachas related to the strings, including the proper number of strings and the required length. The Gemara Menachos cites a machlokes concerning the number of strings required to fulfill the mitzvah tzitzis and their minimal length. Ton Rabbanon, kama chut nu noisei. How many strings do you have to put? Beis Shammai oimrim daled, ubeis Hillel oimrim gimel. The kamatei meshuleshes. Beisham, and how many have to be meshuleshes? Beisham oimrim daled, ubeis Hillel oimrim gimel. Means meshuleshes is hanging. Now, what this is referring to is the shear. Beis Hillel says has to be 4 etzbos, and Beis Hillel says has to be 3 etzbos. Amrav Papa Hilchos adal b'toch sholish mishuleshes arba. Means you have to attach 4 strings within 3 finger breadths of the edge of the garment. And when they hang, they should hang down 4 finger breadths beyond the knots, beyond when you did the windings. So the Gemara asks, Lamema di'isle shiura. So is there b'chlal a shiur? V'raminu tzitzis ain't tzitzis aliyotze. It's something that emerges from the corner, which implies any amount. Ain't tzitzis alamashu, even a little bit. For all ziknei Beis Shammai, ziknei Beis Hillel, aliyas Yochanan b'seira, the elders of the Beis Shammai Beis Hillel went up to the attic of Yochanan v'Amru, tzitzis ein lon shiur. There is no special shear for tzitzit. Kiyotze b'lulav ein bo shear. Just like a lulav doesn't have a shear. My lav ein lo shear klal. Our understanding, the Havamina, is that there's no shear at all. Lo, ein lo shear lamala. That means it could be as long as you want. That is not a shear, but it's got a minimum shear. Yesh lo shear lamata. According to the Beis Shammai, 4 tzitzit strings are attached to the garment, which becomes 8 when they are folded over. So you take 4 strings, you put it through the hole of the garment. Now you have 8 strings hanging over. According to Beis Hillel, 3 tzitzit strings are attached to the garment, which becomes 6 when folded over. In addition, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree as to whether the tzitzit strings must be 3 finger breadths long past the part where they are tied and wound. That's Beis Hillel, 3. Beis Shammai 4. Means we're going to see that you make a knot and then you wind and you have, we'll see how many areas of windings you have. So then once you're done with the windings, here. Yeah, here. Here's the strings, but there's 1 winding, 2 windings, 3 windings, 4, 5. And then you have the strings below. How long does this have to be? So it has to be at least 4 etzbos according to Beis Shammai, or 3 etzbos according to Beis Hillel. Although the halacha is usually in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, when Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue, Rav Papa rules in accordance with Beis Shammai concerning the number of strings as well as their length. This case is an exception to the rule due to a passage a bit early in the Gemara Menachos concerning the number of strings, which derives that 4 strings, which total 8, when inserted through the hole in the garment and folded over, are necessary. And there it didn't specify that the opinion was Beis Shammai. It says Menachos Lamed Tes Amud Beis, Gidil Shnayim, Gidilim Arba. So from the pasuk, the Gemara derived that that's why you have to have 4 strings. So the Shulchan Aruch rules like Beis Shammai. Minyan chutei atzitzis b'chol knaf. How many strings do you need in each corner? Arba kfulim, 4 that are folded over. Shem shmona. V'im hosif pasul. If you added, it's certainly pasul. Concerning the length of the strings, Rashi holds how much should be hanging, that the measurement of 4 finger breadths given by Beis Shammai refers to the section of the string that is not tied and wound. And that's the interpretation followed in the translation of the Gemara. According to Rashi, then the tied and the wound section must be 2 finger breadths, since the Gemara teaches that the thread that is not tied must be double the length of the part that is tied. So if the part that's not tied has to be 4, then the part that has to be tied is 2. That yields a total 6 feather, but minimum for each stitch of string. So again, if this part, which is the tied and wound part, has to be a minimum of 2, then this part, the part after the tied and wound, has to be at least 4. That's Rashi's pshat. However, Tosfos and the Rosh interpret the Gemara to refer to the section that is tied. Accordingly, Beis Shammai holds that the tied section must be a minimum of 4 finger breadths, and the section that is untied must be double that, or 8. So that means this part has to be 4, and this part has to be double that, which is 8. Thus, the total length of each string must be at least 12 finger breadths. Rosh, Hachina Ginon, Lasot says Yud Beis Etzbos, Shlish Gdil, Arba Etzbos. Right, a third of that 12 is going to be the tied and wound part, which is 4 finger breadths. Ushnei Shlishi Anaf Shemona Etzbos, and 2/3 will be just the hanging strings, which has to be at least 8. So the opinion of the Rosh is accepted by Shulchan Aruch. According to Rav Chaim Na'eh, each finger breadth, which is measured by the width of the thumb, measures 2 centimeters, which means that the tied sections must be at least 8 centimeters, and the rest of the string would be 16 centimeters for a total of
No,
centimeters. Mario? Oh, total of 24 centimeters from the first tie until the end of the string. What was that? The length of the strings b'di'evet. In the previous section, we discussed the minimum length of the tzitzis on the level of a chatchila. The Gemara earlier Menachos writes that if the tzitzis were severed after being initially of the proper length, then they're still kosher. If at least the amount of kedei aniva remains from the section of the string that is not wound and tied. As long as one of the strings that you're going to use to do the windings around the other strings which is the length needed to tie a slip knot with it, 5 centimeters according to Chazon Ish, and 4 centimeters according to Chaim Nut. That means, according to these opinions, as long as you have 4 or 5 centimeters left, even if it was a little initially kosher, then it got severed. But if you got 4 or 5 centimeters left, it remains kosher. Remnants of tzitzis are kosher. Same thing when you use the hyssop branch for the paraduma, that even if it's cut, as long as it remains with a certain shear, it's kosher. Kama shear gardumim. How much are if you have tzitzis that were cut and you want to say there's a certain shear that keeps them kosher, you need at least to tie them in a slip knot. If a string was severed all the way at the beginning, where it's connected to the garment, then the tzitzis are unfit. The Mishnah Berurah writes that one should inspect the location where the tzitzis is attached to the garment to ensure that it's not torn at all. If one of the strings has torn off of the base of the garment, where it's connected to the corner, pasul. Because of Zov, the Taz, you have to inspect your tzitzis all the time to make sure it's not torn. Okay, we will finish the strings and deal with how to put on the talis and tzitzis next week. Any questions or oros, comments? Everybody's muted.
Silent.
All good.
We all good?